is your reporting? Take us through it.
Hi, yes, Nicole. In recent weeks, the January 6th committee has really ramped up its efforts, especially this week. We've seen now 35 subpoenas go out. 16 of those were just in the past 2 days. We've seen more than 150 witnesses come in. We've seen new investigators be hired. In fact, I believe the whole investigative team is now in place. And so they're really, in the first couple months of the committee, they felt like they were sort of building the plane as they were flying. And now they feel like they have their whole team in place. They have a strategy. They have different assignments for different investigators, and they're really getting moving now. And I think you're seeing that this week with this latest round of subpoenas.
You know, in reading your reporting, Luke, I was reminded of the Mueller probe, which was split into, we got to know after the fact, Andrew Weissman was working on what we on the outside called sort of the collusion track, and then there were other investigators working on the obstruction track. It seems like the investigation is now in these separate buckets, and I'm going to ask you to take me through them, but I want to read some of this color because it's so interesting for those of us who've been covering this for many months now. Working out of a nondescript office building at the bottom of Capitol Hill, the committee's investigators have divided themselves into color-coded teams to pursue several avenues of inquiry. They're looking into the money trail. Investigators are scrutinizing the groups that funded the protests that preceded the violence. Planned meetings. The panel's pressing for answers about gatherings at the Willard and other Washington hotels where Mr. Trump's allies who were involved in the effort to overturn the election. Foreknowledge of violence. The most difficult piece of the investigation involves unearthing evidence that Mr. Trump or anyone in his inner circle had foreknowledge that violence was a possibility on January 6th and whether they took any steps to either encourage or discourage the storming of the Capitol. I want to ask you about that one, Luke, because it seems like we know the answer to knowledge of violence while it was happening, but explain this effort to understand knowledge of what would happen ahead of time in light of the kinds of things they were saying. Trial by combat, Flynn's speech the night before, Donald Trump's using the word fight, fight, fight. What are they really scrutinizing in that effort?
Right. So the examples of what many people would consider incitement, and certainly the House impeachment managers believe is incitement, are in the public record. We know about Rudy Giuliani saying, let's have trial by combat. We know people, Mo Brooks exhorting the crowd to kick ass. We know people were encouraged to march down to the Capitol. But there's a question underway about whether there was anything more direct, any foreknowledge that any members of Trump's inner circle would have this crowd could turn violent, and whether they took any steps to stop that or encourage it. And so that is a key question that investigators are probing as they do these interviews. Of course, it will depend how much cooperation they get from some in Trump's inner circle, whether they can put those questions directly to people. As we know, Steve Bannon, Jeffrey Clark have both refused to now cooperate with the committee. I believe actually Betsy broke the story about Jeffrey Clark. So they do need cooperation, but they are getting some. They are getting witnesses come in. Some witnesses have actually surprised.
We lost Luke's shot. I'm going to bring you in, Betsy. Your reporting was cited. We covered it here. But something that I've been curious about and have been asking all of you about is this idea of voluntary witnesses. We know from some great reporting from all of you and some of the great books that have come out since the insurrection that Pat Cipollone, then the White House counsel, thought Donald Trump would be arrested that day. We know acting Attorney General Jeffrey Rosen voluntarily testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee for their report. We know that he's testified and cooperated with the 1-6 committee. I wonder if you can sort of give me the buckets of individuals that you're looking at or sort of following and trying to figure out if they are among the cooperating witnesses that Luke reports on today.
One of the most interesting buckets are people who actually participated in violence that day. Politico has reported that the committee has been in touch with people who were engaged in violent rioting to talk to them about how exactly things went down and why they became so horrible. And in fact, federal judges, at least one judge, has said during court proceedings that she encourages rioters to engage with the committee as a way of showing that they feel some sort of contrition for the horrific violence that they were involved in. That has sent an important signal to the hundreds of people facing federal charges for the violence that played out that day. One thing that's always considered in criminal sentencing processes is whether or not the person who was convicted feels contrition over what they did. And now there's been this signal that, hey, if you cooperate with the January 6th Select Committee, that's something that could result in your sentence being slightly more lenient than it would have been otherwise. So that's a key thing that we're focusing on. Of course, also looking at the fascinating different categories of people who the committee is reaching out to, keeping an eye on potential involvement from folks on the organizing side. For instance, there were a lot of people involved in organizing the rally who did it more from kind of the nuts and bolts technical side than from the ideological, fire-breathing political messaging side. So we expect that some people who fit in that category will have information that the committee won't have to fight particularly hard to secure. And then, of course, there are also people who are involved on the legal side, those senior DOJ officials, most of whom, with the very important exception of Jeff Clark, lined up, got in, and testified as quick as they could before Trump could take legal action to try to keep them from testifying. It's such a big, interesting, varied group of people the committee is going after that we know they're just getting information from all sorts of different sources and vantage points.
Harry Littman, I want your thoughts on these two big developments today. We'll start with Luke's reporting, and let me just recite these three buckets again. The color-coded teams are pursuing several avenues of inquiry. The money trail, this is something that Congressman Eric Swalwell has been talking about since that second impeachment of Donald Trump. Planned meetings, this is that what the Trump folks called command center at the Willard and other Washington hotels. And this question we've been trying to drill down on foreknowledge of violence before and during the insurrection. Your thoughts?
So 2 points. First, on the opinion, it's really thorough and sure-footed. And if it holds up, Nicole, basically it blows out of the water not just Trump's claims, but also those of the Bannons and Clarks of the world. So it's potentially very significant. On the points you made and the bucket.
I'm sorry, Harry. Do you think that might be something that, do you think Merrick Garland was waiting for this opinion before making a decision about charging Bannon?
No. And I can follow up if you like.
Please.
But on the buckets. Okay, well, first on the buckets. So many to talk about. The most important, though, is this latest round of subpoenas. We have a lot of knowledge about a lot of the events. Something we're relatively impoverished on is just what Trump was doing, his potential coordination, which the subpoena letter puts out there for another witness, and his apparent jubilation that day, any possible coordination with the insurrectionists. The last 10, the Millers, Carricks, etc., those really go directly to the heart of what is Trump doing here, thinking here, trying to arrange here? And so they go, as it were, very much to the top. Back to Garland. Look, I wrote this at the time. It's a very methodical process. There's law on the other side. Part of it, though, Chutkan dealt with. The law out there for previous presidents, which she properly said just doesn't apply when there's the push comes to shove aspect as we have here, where Biden says no, he's the person who makes the final call. She made that clear, but also things on the facts. And it's just a really elaborate process, potentially involving hearing from Bannon's lawyer. People shouldn't be surprised, even though I know they are, that he's being methodical and taking a fair bit of time.